Right, folks, it is 2 o'clock, so I'm going to start this right on time. Try to be respectful of everybody's schedule. We're going to be going over today navigating real estate auctions for buyer and listing agents. We're going to talk mostly about traditional, what I call traditional auctions, but we're going to touch a little bit on um, foreclosure. My background has been in the auction business for, oh gosh, since the late 90s. Um, I have done general brokerage as well, um, act as state court receiver, do a lot of work with foreclosure, bankruptcy, bank REO, um, working with law firms, probate courts, things of that nature. And we do have offices right now in Ohio and in Florida. And in both of those offices, we regularly have buyer agent co-op on the when we're on the sell side, and we also do listing co-ops with real estate agents and brokers when they have clients that could benefit in auction. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about all those aspects of the business, kind of how they work, and go from there. If you guys have questions, if you could just either put them in the chat or write them down, we'll do a Q&A at the end. And if you don't mind, please make sure to mute yourselves. So we inevitably somebody's going to get a phone call in the middle of the session, um, and forget that they're not muted, and we're going to hear the entire thing. So if you wouldn't mind double checking and making sure you're muted. So the two of us that are on today is myself and Jeremy Pratt. Um, Jeremy's our broker in both Florida and Ohio, and actually New Mexico as well, which we are working on an office arrangement there. So here I said we're going to go through the two basic types of auctions that we conduct. Traditional would include, um, I'd say, bankruptcy auctions would be traditional. Um, Probate would be traditional. Divorce would be traditional. Foreclosure is different. It's really its own animal in that we're working directly under a court order where there is no seller. In a traditional scenario, even if it were a distressed asset scenario, we would have a direct seller, such as a bankruptcy trustee or such as a receiver, which would be acting in the capacity of the title holder. So um, we would consider those distress sales to be traditional, but not necessarily foreclosure. So some of your main differences, for the most part, most of the time in a traditional setting, there's going to be interior access and there's going to be financing allowed. Financing is allowed on the foreclosure side, but it's much more difficult. So I'll explain that when we flip over to that side. There's going to be significant marketing. Pro photos might be drone. Um, you're going to have e-blast, MLS. You're going to have website syndication, social media. You may have media relations that do use in a lot of our auction scenarios. There would be an informational package, which, if it was an investment property, for example, might have copies of leases in a single family res consumer sale. It might have the uh, title search information. It's going to have a copy of terms and conditions. It's going to have a copy of the purchase and sale agreement that the buyer would be expected to sign that ties to the terms and conditions. So all of this data is going to be available in a package up ahead of time. There's also going to be a warranty most of the time for free and clear title, and there's going to be a traditional style closing. That doesn't necessarily mean a round table per se, because we don't do very many of those anymore. Can't remember the last time we actually had the buyer and seller sit down at the table together. Um, but a more traditional closing in that there is a settlement statement. There are fees and costs paid by both sides that are shown on a settlement statement, which is totally different than our foreclosure scenario, which is, no interior access. The title holder maintains title to the property. That means that they maintain quiet and peaceful possession of the asset until such time as it transfers title, right? So I said I'd be talking about the financing. Financing is usually not allowed. It's cash only. And the reason for that is extremely difficult to get a traditional mortgage on a property that the appraiser can't get into. So in the limited scenarios where there are financing options from traditional or non-traditional lenders that they'll do it without appraisal or interior appraisal, then maybe that's possible. But as a kind of as a standard, we say, hey, look, it's cash only, and we can get into the small percentage of times where it's possible if somebody asks, but we try to say cash only. There's limited marketing. We usually don't have pro photos. A lot of times we don't have photos at all. A lot of times we're not even allowed to step foot on the property, so can't get pictures. So we're using something like that we found on Google. There's limited information available. We haven't been inside the property, so whatever information there is, we're garnering from public sources like the county website. If there is an old Zillow listing or something like that, you might pull that information off that, but at that point, it's also going to be disclaimed for accuracy purposes. Um, Say something in the description like property is reported to have wall-to-wall carpeting, paint on the walls, solid oak cabinets, and tile floors. But there's no guarantee of that because we haven't seen it. So there would be a disclaimer. There's also no title guarantee in foreclosure. It is the potential purchaser's responsibility to research title for themselves and make themselves confident that the title is going to clear or have an understanding of any liens that might not wipe. And then on the closing side, there really isn't a traditional closing. Um, it is the buyer provides um, funds and the sheriff or the auction company provides the deed. It's usually um, the the high bid price plus the buyer's premium, if there was one, gets transmitted, and then the deed is either given to the purchaser or recorded with a copy given to the purchaser. There's not necessarily a settlement statement. There's no closing. It's just trade money for deed. So some of the language that you'll hear, the auction business kind of has its own language, but you're going to hear some of these terms like buyer's premium. I already mentioned once. That's an amount over and above the high bid price that the purchaser will pay. It's included in a total contract price. You have terms of sale. I already used that term today as well. It's the terms that the bidder is going to agree to when they register for the auction. They're going to agree to these terms and conditions in order to be allowed into the bidding. The terms and conditions are then put into a purchase and sale agreement. So the terms are more consumer centric, a couple pages, maybe three, and then they're going to be translated into a purchase and sale agreement, which, could be five, six, 7 pages, depending on where you are with different local addendums as necessary, disclosures, etc. There's going to be a broker registration. That is for the broker or agent to identify their client to the auction firm in order to secure your fees. In many auctions, there are buyer co-op. In some, there are not. So, in the ones that are, most auction companies are going to require a broker registration, where they're basically saying is that you need to identify to us who your client is ahead of them bidding. It's more of like a referral type arrangement. You're introducing the auction company to the client, and you're getting paid for that. It's not necessarily getting paid to represent. Just know it's a little bit different in kind of the auction world. A lot of auction companies are going to you introduce the prospective purchaser to the auction and to the opportunity, and in exchange for that, you will get a fee. So just know that there's timing associated with that representation. You're going to also hear about something called the max bid. It's an online functionality whereby a bidder can essentially engage the computer system to bid for them. So, for example, if the bidding were sitting at $100,000, bidder wanted to bid up to $200,000, they could go into the max bid feature under most auctioneers' online functionalities, type in that 200,000 number, and then the computer system would bid for that prospective purchaser against other max bids and against other manually placed bids up to that $200,000 mark. So it's just an electronic functionality to facilitate bidding. Then we have kind of our three um, financial types of auctions, which are going to be absolute, minimum bid, and subject to confirmation. All of them work a different way. Absolute is the property is going to be sold um, guaranteed to the highest bidder regardless of price. Note that if auctions are advertised for auction in every state, but I believe Louisiana, an auction is deemed to be a reserve auction unless advertised otherwise. So it would need to say, and it would need to be advertised as an absolute auction to be an absolute auction where the property is going to transfer regardless of price. You then have a minimum bid or a reserve auction where the seller is going to declare a minimum price that they're willing to accept. Sometimes that is in just the contract with the auctioneer, it's undisclosed to the public. Sometimes it is disclosed, but the seller then has the right to accept, reject, or counter if a predetermined price is not met. If a predetermined price is met, then they would be obligated to sell the property. So using the $100,000, $200,000 amount, if bidding was at 100,000, but a reserve price was set at 200,000 and the bidding stopped at 198, the seller would have the option to accept that 198, reject it outright, or counter it. Now, if the reserve price was um, 200 and the bidding got to $200,001, the seller would be obligated to accept that offer and would not have the authority to reject. Subject to confirmation is the most flexible for a seller. We tend to use them quite a bit because they're used in court cases, but the seller can accept, reject, or counter at any price whatsoever. This is used a lot in court. Um, we have to go in and get court approval, and it's 100% subject to the judge saying that we did our job and we got the right amount of money for the property. Um, I have not ever gone to court in thousands of these and not received confirmation from the court, but it is possible. So you need to know some sales are subject to seller confirmation, some sales are subject to court confirmation. And, these are kind of things that agents, especially representing a buyer, should know to ask. Hey, is there a buyer's premium? What are the terms? Do I have to register my client ahead of the time? What is this sale? Is it absolute, reserve, or subject to confirmation? And then if you're helping someone with their bidding online, understanding how a max bid feature works. Auction companies are happy to answer these questions. You just have to call them up and ask. A lot of this stuff is going to be available in a download on the auctioneer's website. Some of your basic contract terms. These are for purchase or listing. An auction has a defined date. Right? We're going to say the auction is going to take place on a particular given day at a particular given time. Same way with the closing. It's going to be a defined date. It's going to be in the terms. It could be 30 days, 45 days. Could be 7 days. So one of the things you as the agent is going to want to find out is what are the dates? What are the deadlines here? How long does my seller or does my buyer have to close? Right? Most auction contracts, 99.999% are as is with inspections and tests that need to be completed ahead of the auction. Um, Most auction companies are going to say, yeah, absolutely. If you want to come in and do an inspection, great, but you have to do it before the auction. If you want to bring in an inspector, that's fine with me too, but you have to do it before the auction. If you need to get environmental tests done, if it's a commercial property, fine. If you want to do that, not a problem, but you're going to need to do it before the auction, or the seller in a commercial scenario may be willing to allow them to be done after the auction, but they're not going to accept a contingency for financing. You're taking the property as is. If it comes back and there's finds a chemical remediation issue that needs to be dealt with, that's going to be the buyer's issue. Um, One of the main reasons banks like to sell property ahead of foreclosure is because they don't want to take title to contaminated property, and is very quite often being sold as is. Bank doesn't have any idea if it's contaminated or not, and they don't want to know. So just know that as is a pretty hard sticking point on a lot of these contracts. Again, defined closing date, no extensions to closing. Lenders traditionally charge a penalty if the buyer does not close. $300 a day is fairly typical. Just know that in an auction scenario, the seller does not have to extend the closing. They can elect to extend the closing. They may charge a fee. They may not charge a fee. But the way that most purchase and sale agreements are written is it's as is. There's a defined date, and the seller does not have to extend that closing, and they may very well not. So you have to understand in an auction scenario, more than likely there was another bidder that might just be $100 or $1,000 behind the person who's in contract. So we have somebody that we can go back to in case there's a default. So it's kind of holding the buyer, feet to the fire. Hey, that closing timeline is real, right? Non-refundable deposit, most contracts, it's usually only returned if the seller can't close. But at least in our sales and most auctioneers are going to run title up front, especially if it's a probate situation, a divorce situation, a distress situation. Title is going to be run ahead of time. So we're going to have a copy of that. So we're going to know if there's going to be a title issue, and we'll usually postpone a sale and not even put it on the market until that's cleared up. So we can do this defined date, we can sell it as is, and we can have a defined closing. Usually the seller is paying for the title search, the tax prorations, and the deed prep. The buyer is going to be paying usually everything else. That includes, any buyer and seller title closing costs or closing costs, title insurance fees. Buyer wants to buy title insurance. They can, but they would have to pay for it. Seller usually is not paying for that. Because we're running title up front, the seller is usually selecting the title company and having that title company perform the closing, and that would be generally written into the purchase and sale contract as well as disclosed in the terms and conditions, right? And then, of course, we said buyers paying all the other closing costs most of the time. So a little bit more on buyer's premium. So here's kind of a case example. um, Amount that the buyer is paying over and above the high bid amount. It is wrapped into the contract price. Most auctioneers use 10% buyer's premium, some use 5. We have seen up to 15 in real estate. When we're talking about equipment, artwork, stuff like that, buyer's premiums can go upwards of 20 and 25%, right? But it is the amount that the buyer is going to pay over and above the high bid amount to equal the total contract price that the buyer will pay to the seller. Inspections and disclosures, we kind of touched on this earlier. Yes, you can inspect in traditional, usually, but before, there are usually open houses, sometimes private showings, copies of leases available, financing is okay. Here's a big one. All disclosures are required. Just because you're selling at auction doesn't mean that your state mandated or your local mandated disclosures are not required. If you're doing it with a title holder, all those disclosures are required. Some jurisdictions have disclosure waivers in certain scenarios, such as if the owner hasn't lived in the property for 2 years, if it's a trustee sale that they've never owned it, if it's a bank REO sale where the bank hasn't just took title to it, there may be waivers, but those waivers are also required. Right. And then moving on, once the bidding is over, the bidding is over. It's as is, sign the contract, make the deposit. We're waiting to closing. There are not post-bidding inspections. Foreclosure, a little bit different. You usually cannot inspect again, quiet and peaceful possession for that title holder until such time as the title transfers. There are no open houses or private showings, um, unless the title holder is going to consent to them. And in Ohio, with private selling officer auctions, where a lot of our work is, you can do open houses. They are allowed under the law if the property is vacant and abandoned. But what usually happens in that scenario is the lender comes in and secures it. And for insurance reasons, they're not going to want anybody to go walking through it during an open house. So I think we're getting close to like 3,500 PSO sales in Ohio. And we have done an open house in one of them. And it was for a very small bank. And it was with the consent of the title holder. It was a pretty nice house. Should have sold to a consumer, and it did. And the title holder wanted to maximize the value and allowed us to do an open house. But that was one out of 3,500. So usually doesn't happen. Again, since you can't get in, no traditional financing. We don't have copies of leases, even if it's rented, because we're not working for the title holder. We're working for the court. We're appointed by a judge. Then there are usually no keys available. So if you buy a foreclosure property, bring the locksmith, bring your drill set, um, you know, kick in the back door, Jimmy open a window. There are no keys. Again, there are no disclosures because we don't know anything. We're acting as a court appointee. The judge who appointed us doesn't know. So they're not going to sign. They're not going to sign any disclosures, and the relief from using the disclosures is actually spelled out in most states' statutes. Again, no interior access even after you are the buyer until closing, because that title holder does maintain their possession rights until title transfers. So for buyer agents, if you're representing a bidder, first and foremost, as we all know now, you have to have an agreement with your client, representation agreement, and how you're getting paid. And while there is BAC in a lot of auctions, there's not buyer agent compensation in all of them. So make sure that you have that spelled out with your client. Um, in the auction contracts, those auction contracts are non-contingent. So it's not even that you're going to be able to write in a BAC as a subject to getting your offer accepted. The offer and acceptance is done during the bidding process that are based on the terms and conditions. There's no BAC included here. So it's either offered or it's not. The seller is either paying it and it's defined, or the buyer has to pay it. It's not something that's negotiated. So what you're going to do, representing a bidder, you're going to get in, you're going to register your buyer with the auction company. Make sure that you're doing that. You're introducing the buyer to the opportunity, and make sure that you get that documented to secure your payment if there is a BAC offered. Okay. If the buyer goes in, goes to an open house, calls the auction company, starts asking for information, and after that, a buyer agent shows up and says, "Hey, by the way, I'm representing Bob." You do run the risk that that auction company is going to say, "Well, that's fine. You can represent Bob, but there's no compensation for you because we're paying you to introduce this individual to the opportunity and they introduced themselves to it. They came to the open house, they called our office, they downloaded the documents, they asked questions, we've had phone calls. You no longer introduced the buyer to the opportunity. So some auction companies will refuse to pay that compensation. So just understand. Tell your client not to reach out to the auctioneers directly, especially if they haven't been registered by you first. Right? You're going to want to go to the showings, go to the open houses. Again, you're representing your client, you're introducing them to the opportunity. So you're going to want to participate in the opportunity with them. Then you make sure that your client is registered to bid. Just because you registered for a commission does not mean that the buyer or prospective buyer is registered to bid. There are two different registrations. One's for the bidder and one's for the real estate agent. Okay. You want to make sure that your client's financially qualified. We talked about before, these are non-contingent contracts. They're not contingent on financing. They're not contingent upon inspection. So you do want to make sure your client's financially qualified, make sure that they have their qualification letter. Most auction companies are going to ask for that as part of the registration. Say, at least for us, we're going to say, hey, we'll let you register, but with most of our clients, they're going to require that the buyer sends us their pre-qualification letter or their pre-approval letter before the auction ends. And if that doesn't come through, some of our seller clients are saying, "Hey, stop them from bidding. We're not going to let them place any more bids." Also know that when you're doing that, if you have a client that can qualify for, say, a $500,000 loan, but you don't want to put that on the lender letter, you're potentially injuring your client. Is let's just say that they can pay 500, but their lender letter only says four because you don't want to let the cat out of the bag that you can pay five. Some auction companies will stop that bidder from bidding when they reach 400,000, even if they're willing to pay more, because there are no proof of funds over that amount. Okay, so make sure when you're doing that, you're disclosing the maximum that your client is qualified for. Make sure that they don't lose out on an opportunity because they presented the wrong letter. Okay. Also, you're not going to bid for your client. The only time that I know of that it's common to bid for your client is in FHA auctions, and I'm not sure they even do that anymore. Um, you really need to have a power of attorney otherwise, or you're basically making an offer on behalf of yourself, not on behalf of your client, and you have no authority to do to make that a representation of purchase on behalf of your client. So, we do require, and most auction companies require that the prospective purchaser do that bidding themselves, register themselves. Right. And after that, your client is the high bidder. You're going to facilitate getting the contract signed and get it back to the auction company. And then all we're doing is we're waiting on closing. We don't have any inspections. We're not renegotiating a contract. We're just essentially waiting on, financing to be to give us the clear to close if there is, or if it's going to be a cash transaction for the title company to get all the ducks in a row and move forward. You guys collect your fee, transaction is over, buyer goes and sees their new house, the seller gets their check, everybody's happy. So if you're going to find your bidders, a lot of this is Ohio. We do a lot of Ohio work, so down on the ones are Ohio auction companies. But please find your auctions for your bidders at our website. Um, Most of ours in Ohio and Florida, but we do it all over the country. Auction Zip is another good one. That's kind of like the MLS for auctions. You can obviously find them at realtor.com, Zillow, etc. Proxy Bid is another one, kind of another auction zip type place where there are all sorts of auctions, not just real estate, but you can find anything there. Zome and auction.com are big ones. They're the auction.com is the 800-pound gorilla. A lot of foreclosures there, a lot of traditional non-foreclosures there as well. A lot of bank REO there. High Bid is another one. Go to auction, kind of another one of those auction listing sites. And then Ohio Real Estate Auction and Auction Ohio, two good friends of mine that have their own statewide auction companies in Ohio. Um, Auction Ohio and Ohio Real Estate Auction also have divisions in Florida. So it'd be Florida Real Estate Auction, and I believe it's Auction Florida. So, or you can use Google or Claude AI or ChatGPT. Just look up, find auctions in your area. The National Auctioneers Association has their website where you can find an auctioneer in your area. You look on their website and find auctions for your clients. So, working with an auctioneer to list or sell, if you have a client that has a need for that, there are a couple of different ways to do it. Um, Auction companies work in different ways, so I'm just going to do this as a generality. First, you need to find an auction company that works in your area. Then you're going to talk to them and say, hey, I've got a client that would benefit for an auction. Can I refer them into you? Or do you partner with real estate agents to, stay involved in the deal? Some will do referral only, some will do partner. The financial models may look a little bit different. Um, if you're partnering and staying involved, especially if you're doing some of the legwork, such as say, hey, maybe you're going to hold the open houses or something like that. And all of it's negotiated. There is no standard in the referral or the partner portal. Just depends on the auction company and how they work. So just know that there is a difference. So here's why maybe your seller might be considering the auction, right? On your traditional side or your traditional listing side, it's time indefinite. Most of our clients are coming to us, whether they're coming direct or they're coming through their current real estate agent, because for whatever reason, they have now established a time need, right? It could be that, school is about to start in a new city. They just got transferred. For whatever reason, the people are coming to the auction to sell because of a time-defined need. It could be that they're about to go into foreclosure or that it's a bankruptcy case, but something is pushing a time frame. So it's time indefinite versus time stable. Um, there is less price control in an auction, but that's kind of a misnomer because what we've all realized is regardless of it's a listing or it's an auction, the market is dictating the price. Although there is more of a perceived price control on the listing side because the seller can just say, "Hey, I'm just not going to sell it." On the auction side, there is not a price. We're going to see what the market is going to tell us. You don't have to take the money, but those sellers are really understanding that they don't dictate the market. It's the market dictating the market. There's also, really less competition on the listing side, more competition on the auction side. Not uncommon for us to take properties that have not gotten any action in 2, 3, 4 months, put it up for auction, and now all of a sudden we have 50 people coming through open houses, 25 registered and bidding. There is definitely competition and eyeballs on an auction property. There you have three, four, five, six listings in a neighborhood. As soon as you put one in that neighborhood up for auction, everybody looking in that neighborhood looks to the auction property. And a lot of times, the traditional listings will not sell until somebody decides who's going to be the buyer of the auction property, unless they're significantly different assets. If they're very similar, the auction property is going to get all the eyeballs, and all the buyers are going to go over to that to try to buy it. And the listings are just going to sit until the auction's over. It's just the way it is. Traditional, hey, we're going to negotiate the first somewhat acceptable offer. Nope, auction, we're just worried about the highest bid. We could get three, four, five bids. We could get hundreds of bids. We're not going to worry about any of them except the highest one. Traditional side, listing side, terms are negotiable. On the auction side, the terms are set by the seller. They're defined up front. That becomes the terms and conditions of sale. Those terms and conditions are translated into the purchase and sale agreement, and those are not changed. The seller's setting the rules, and the bidding community is telling that seller what they're willing to pay to buy the property under those set rules. Right? Now, on the traditional side, the costs are shared. It's split between the buyer and seller. For example, the buyer and seller are both going to pay a little bit of closing costs to the title company. On the auction side, buyer's going to pick up 100% of that in most scenarios, right? Contingencies in a traditional listing, auction side, non-contingent. Traditional listing, you might be spreading your marketing out. If you anticipate a 90-day listing or a 120-day listing, you may spread out your marketing and your marketing ad spend over that period of time. Auction scenario, hey, we're selling in between 22 and 30 days. We're putting 100% of the marketing out within that 22 to 30 days. So you have very, very focused and extensive marketing during a very short period of time as opposed to spread out. Those are kind of the main differences. People that have a time-defined need want to set the terms, want to get sold by, say, March 1st. Those are the clients that we're talking to today. They want to be under contract and done before the end of February, March 1st at the end. They're going to set the rules. We're going to market the properties for them in conjunction with a real estate broker partner some of the time. Um, but they're looking at time defined and sometimes are willing to give up some dollars in order to get that time defined. So we're solving problems with the auction scenario. Um, Auction seller, we're talking about timelines, right? But not always. Sometimes it's a very hot property, so I use an example of if Kenny Rogers is selling his ranch, right? What is Kenny Rogers' house worth? It's unique. What would Graceland be worth? How would you comp Graceland, or would you offer Graceland at auction, right? So it's hotter, it's unique. The other side of that, sometimes it's high DOM. It's not selling for whatever reason, so you're going to convert to auction. Financial distress, that could be bankruptcy, divorce, could be pending foreclosure. It could be, a death in the family, right? You could be having a property that's been sitting for a very, very, very long time, vacant, which could have been due to a death, due to a divorce. It could be that it's in need of lots of repair and the seller doesn't want to do any work to it. They don't want to negotiate back and forth on deficiencies. They don't want to start turning screws and slinging paint because we all know once you turn one screw, you're turning probably three or four. A lot of sellers don't want to do that. And then sometimes it's just the seller wants to turn their cash quick. Investors like to buy at real estate auction. A lot of them like to sell at real estate auction too, because they're gonna churn their money, get it back, go do another investment. Right? Kind of one of these examples um, that we had that hit a lot of these check marks. Just did it last year in Tennessee. It's a 5,000 square foot custom home, so really, really unique. It was on the water. It did not have high DOM because it hadn't been on the market before. It was tied to a lawsuit. So there was a distress there that the owners were fighting. It was owned by partners in an LLC. They were fighting. Because they were fighting and they couldn't decide what to do, the court directed it to be sold. So here we're working for the court system. It's a need to sell situation. The judge said, "Hey, we're selling it." Judge said, "Hey, uh, we're not going to tell you what the price is. You go get the highest price, come back and talk to me, and I'll let you know if you did your job right and if we're going to transfer the property." Right? The judge was making the decision. The two title holders had no say in this whatsoever anymore. If they wanted to object to the high bid price, they could have, but they would have had to come up with a really, really, really good reason to get that sale to not confirm. And like I said, I've never had one not confirm. So that's kind of a tough road, right? There were brokers that they were talking to and that for this property that were saying, yeah, we should list it around $2 million. We actually sold that for 2.75. So in this situation, because it was hot, because it was unique, because it was a need to sell, we were able to go in and get a premium for the property, turned around, never got an objection from any of the parties, never had either of them pipe up that they had an objection to it. Both of the parties that were title holders bid on the property. They dropped out. One of them dropped out at 1.8. One of them dropped out at 2.1. And we ended up selling it to the best friend. If you look to the property to the right in the picture, um, the guy who lived in that house, his best friend bought it so he could move in next to his buddy. Guy who bought it was in Chicago, did not come to an inspection, read the inspection report, read the due diligence materials online, went through the photographs, said that he'd been in the property about a year before, walked through it for about an hour while he was there for a cocktail party. That's all he had seen it, and he paid 2.75 million for a property. So even though we do like to have people come through them, it's not always necessary. So here we are. Kind of imagine if you had five or six um, properties, maybe you didn't want to touch them. You didn't want to deal with it, refer them to your local auctioneer, make your income. You don't always have to be a partner in the deal. You refer it off, collect a fee. We actually did partner with an agent on this Tennessee sale. That agent walked away with $125,000 commission on that $2.75 million sale. If they would have listed it on themselves, they would have made 82. We partnered with them in the auction, and they made 125. We actually contacted them because because we were getting engaged by the court. It wasn't one where the agent came to us. We actually went to the local agent for help because we wanted local assistance, and we're able to, help that agent make $125,000 a year. So it does swing both ways. Doesn't happen like that very often, but when it does, the agents actually make pretty good money. So for sellers, or you're talking to your sellers about their benefits, one of the benefits is no seller commission. We're usually doing these on buyer's premiums. Now, understand, not all auction companies work the same. A lot of auctioneers don't believe in a buyer's premium. Most do. So there might not be seller commission. You're not mispricing. You're gonna set the property up. The market is going to tell us what it's worth. So you're not going to have, hey, we got it listed for 500,000 and we're just going to knock that down and we're going to do price reduction after price reduction after price reduction. Next thing you know, it's been 90 days on the market and it's stale. Doesn't happen with an auction. Um, could have limited or upfront costs. Some auction companies do charge a marketing fee. Some do not. Something that you're going to ask the auctioneer when you go talk to them. All these things are selling as is, very few repairs. Um, we will tell sellers, hey, we recommend that you have a pre-listing inspection done, um, but you don't have to. And especially if this is a fixer-upper property and a buyer is going to look for a value add property, say don't start doing any changes at all. Just leave them all for the buyer, right? Auctioneer usually manages and funds all the marketing. Um, if they are charging a marketing fee, that's going to be something that the seller might pay up front, and then the auctioneer is going to manage all of that expenditure. So no, if you are working with an auctioneer as a partner, you may not have any expense for yourself because the auctioneer is going to handle all of it. Either the seller will pay for it, the auction company might pay for it. And there's no inspection, so there's no renegotiation after the fact. There's no retrading the deal for the seller. They know that the high bid on auction day is something that they can contract for. So if they choose to, and then that is going to be the sale price. Getting a non-refundable deposit, and you're usually doing a quicker closing because you have buyers that are walking in with pre-qualifications. You already have title run. So if you have a cash buyer and title already run, I mean, you could theoretically do a closing in as short as 4 days. So agents, why would an agent maybe want to do this? And again, all auction companies are different. So you got to find out from the one that you're electing to call what their policies are. But hey, look, it could be a new income stream for you. Um, you might be referring three, four, five properties at auction, and making referral fees. Something else that a lot of agents are starting to do is they're bringing up the opportunity that's available to sellers for auction in their listing appointment. And I'll say 90% of those sellers are not at all interested in it, but those agents are bringing it up in the conversation. And the sellers are saying, oh, that's interesting. We've talked to two other agents. None of them has offered this as an option. We don't like it as an option, but that's unique. You're telling us something that we have never heard before, something that nobody's told us before. It makes you unique. Maybe that because you just brought it up, even if they don't like it, gets you that listing, even if it doesn't turn into an auction. So, something to consider bringing up in your listing appointment. Usually, no out-of-pocket cost for you as the agent. The auctioneer is going to help you close the seller. For most auction companies, especially us, all you have to do is get us on a call with the seller, get us on a Zoom with the seller, get us in a meeting. We'll take it from there. If the seller can be closed, and their property and they are right for auction, we'll do it. You don't need to know anything other than the auctioneer's phone number. Most of them will take it from there and close the deal, and you just get a check, right? You're going to work within a system. Everything's very structured. We only have 22 to 30 days. So most auction companies have a structure. This happens on day one. This happens on day three. This happens on day five. Very, very structured. Again, auctioneer is going to manage the marketing. You might do some of your socials. They might ask you to put it on MLS if they're not in the MLS in that area, but your operational responsibility for marketing are going to be extremely limited. Quick closing, again, title's going to get run. It's going to be an as-is property. So you as the agent are getting paid faster. The auction company is usually going to manage the transaction coordinator items. A lot of times the title company is just going to handle it. It's usually pretty easy because you don't have a lot. You have a non-contingent contract with a hard deposit on day one. So it's pretty simple. But you guys aren't familiar with the process. So most auction companies will just handle it for the transaction. And then a lot of auction companies will give you all the buyer leads because only one person can buy the property, but we may have 5, 10, 50 inquiries. At least for my firm, we are 100% seller centric. We don't work buyers at all. So something that we give away to the buyers, and a lot of auction companies do, is all those buyer leads that came through unrepresented. If you do traditional buyers, you now know that this list of people was looking for a 4 bedroom, 3 bath in a particular neighborhood, in a particular price point, in a particular school system, and they were pre-qualified. They didn't have an agent. I mean, that's a layup. And we're going to get their phone number and their email address because it's part of the broker and bidder registration. So if they register to bid or they come to an open house, we're getting their contact information. And you as the referring agent or the partner agent are going to be able to capitalize on that data. We do not collect it and co-op with you for a referral fee on that. Some auction companies do. Most don't. They just give it to the agent as a benefit. Thank you for bringing us the deal. Here's your check. Here's all these buyer leads. Agent responsibilities, a little bit different depending on the auction company. It's usually identify the seller. You may draft the general description and put it in the MLS. Sometimes we might not have seen the asset. I sell properties every week that I've never seen before, but the agent that we're working with has. They know it intimately. So you may be asked to draft a description. You might email your sphere of influence or conduct showings as necessary. But if you don't want to email your SOI, you don't want to do any marketing, not a problem. A lot of auction companies, they're going to do the showings or the opens themselves. You might not even be asked to do that. Inquiries, we ask, most auction companies ask, hey, if you get a phone call from a prospective purchaser, if you do not know the answer to that question, backwards and forwards, inside and out, 100%, don't answer it. Just refer that person over to the auction company and let us answer it. Even if you do know it and you can't answer it, the auction company is logging the data. They're logging in all the calls. So you're going to want to turn that information over to that auctioneer so they can add that data to what will eventually be a seller report, which is going to be very important. Seller's going to want to report. They're going to want to know how the marketing hit, how many people called, how many people went through. That's another thing that we do for the selling partnership. If you had a substantive conversation with a prospective bidder, maybe you give them a call right before the auction, make sure that they know about it. Auction company is going to handle 99% of that. On auction day, if you have a real good rapport with the seller, you're gonna, you know, keep them on the reservation on auction day. Auction company is going to handle all the aspects of the auction, bidder inquiries, bidding, contracting, all that stuff, right? And depending on jurisdiction, sometimes um, you are not required to have a real estate license in order to offer the property at auctions. The auctioneers can do it, but in some places, a licensed real estate agent has to transmit those contracts. So you may be asked to transmit the contract between the buyer and seller. And then you're waiting on your paycheck and go find more deals. It's pretty simple. So here are places for you to find auction sellers. Your own portfolio of listings, investors divorce, pre-foreclosure, bankruptcy probate, um, law firms and financial managers are pretty big. Um, we get an enormous amount of business from law firms and financial managers. Expireds are also real good leads for auction listings. Um, they're not bad leads for general brokerage listings either. Um, Even if you don't think they want to talk about auction, it's not bad to mention it to an expired because as soon as that thing goes expired in MLS, they're going to have 30 agents calling them. They're all going to be telling the same thing. How do you set yourself apart? You got to tell them something they haven't heard before. Maybe talking to them about an auction option, even if they're not going to select that option, sets you apart from all the other phone calls. It's not bad to manage, or it's not bad to mention. And then obviously, local banks and credit unions, residential loan servicers are a totally different animal, and I that would be a whole class on why you don't want to spend time on them. Nope, we're actually not doing that class today. So sorry. In one of them, we actually talk about commission rates and whatnot. We're not doing that today. I'm just going to keep it general. But folks, we are 52 minutes into what I had allocated for an hour. So we do have Q&A if um, people had questions. Oh, hey, Carlos. Greetings from Orlando. Are we going to have a copy of the recording? We will have the recording available on YouTube by tomorrow. It'll be on the Gryphon USA YouTube by tomorrow. Traditional auction recommended when there's a distressed situation, divorce, and is financing with mortgage allowable? Um, no, we don't say that a distress situation is required at all. We sell a lot of luxury properties at auction, so it doesn't need to be distressed. The seller would want to be facing some sort of a time need or have some other financial motivation to sell, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a distressed property. And yes, financing is acceptable in a sale that we're doing for a direct seller. Foreclosure, it usually doesn't work, but yeah, people finance auction properties all the time. Is a referral paid to agent is only to introduce the client to auction company? Do realtors get paid this referral fee if the buyer? No. They would not get paid a referral fee if the buyer doesn't win the auction. The only agent that gets paid is the buyer that refers in the agent that, or the buyer who ultimately purchases. Um, no points for second place, I guess. How do you determine price if there's no access to the interior condition of the property? Um, People do it all the time. I can tell you that when I started, um, I bought and sold probably 100 properties easy that I never gained access to, never got into. You just kind of learn. to make some assumptions based upon the exterior. If the roof is absolutely shot and the windows are covered over with brown paper bags, I assume the inside is trashed, and I'm going to do my assessment and say furnaces shot, AC is shot, kitchen shot, bathrooms are shot, flooring and walls are shot, and I'm just doing an assessment. Um, I don't recommend that somebody who is just a consumer buyer get into that market. It's just there are too many things that can go wrong. Carlos, most auction companies are commission based. There are some things that are fee based, that are ancillary to the auction business. Like, for example, I act as a state court receiver. Um, and that is, kind of a trustee in state court that is hourly. But within those cases, I also sometimes act as an auctioneer, and that's going to be commission. So most of it, 99% of it is commission. But if you get into like the trustee side, or if the seller is asking you to do things that might not be um, what a normal real estate agent might do. Yeah, you might charge an hourly rate for that, but I would caution you to make sure that your broker is aware, and that your insurance policy covers you for whatever you're doing. You don't want to go do something to make 35 bucks only to find out that you're getting sued for 12 grand. Are there any other questions? If presented to a seller and decide, if an auction opportunity is, the compensation on your side, I'm not going to get into compensation splits on on a public forum like this. I'm sorry, I just can't do that. I'd be happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you if you have a particular scenario that we can discuss a true project. I'd be happy to discuss that as it pertains to a particular scenario. Carlos, I do not have a phone number for you. I will. Okay, 407. Okay. As soon as I am, as soon as I head out of here, I've got another seminar that I'm teaching. Carlos, would tomorrow morning be okay? I'd be happy to discuss with you for however long you want tomorrow morning. Awesome. I'll give you a call then. Joe, no problem. Thanks for attending. You're welcome, Laura. Are there any other questions? Right, yep. No problem, Carlos. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Happy to. All right. Well, folks, we are getting to 3 o'clock, and I have a session that's supposed to start at 3 that I actually have to drive to. So I can do one more minute, one more quick question if you guys have one, and then I'm going to close out. Wonderful, Valerie. Be happy to talk to you. I don't know, there's cell number and text number. Good for me. Sorry, I don't know if I had that earlier in the presentation. But yeah, happy to chat with folks. All right, guys. It is 3 o'clock, so if there are no more questions, I am going to close out. Again, um, number for me is 614-774-4118. Shoot me a text. We can set up a call. Happy to work with you guys if it's not an area that I can help you. Been doing this quite a long time and know auctioneers all over the country that we can plug you into. Plug you in with some good people that'll treat you guys right. All right, folks. Everybody, hope you have a great rest of your day and great rest of your week. Be safe. Thanks for listening.